So whether you were here or you're watching from home, welcome.
So then we took off after that.
This year, as we go through our adult faith education program, it's really about people's faith journeys. And this month, for the month of October, it's called Faith and Healing. And we're going to be hearing from people in the medical field and hearing their story, how they got there, how their faith has interfaced with that story, perhaps highs and lows of their story, perhaps even COVID stories amongst that, telling the story. So I introduced to you our first person willing to sit in the hot seat. Thank you very much, Mary Miller. Mary is the one nurse practitioner that we'll be speaking to in this series. And actually you came by way of nurse before nurse practitioner, so there's a lot of pieces in that. But thank you for being willing to share with us and with the folks at home, and it's yours.
Thank you. So when I talk to a group, it's customary for me to stand up, so sitting is very awkward for me. So if I fidget and wiggle and then finally stand up, it's because I have trouble sitting for lengths of time. But as Pastor Leah said, I am a nurse practitioner. I have been in the nursing field, I realize now, for 45 years. It's like, oh my, okay. There was life before becoming a nurse, but I've been a nurse practitioner for 28 years. So have been in the field and have done a variety of things, but I didn't just start as a nurse. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how this all evolved and the steps that occurred. So I grew up on a ranch in western South Dakota, cattle ranch, which meant you had dogs and cats and horses and cows and all the things that go with that, and chickens. The chickens were the livelihood. In 1960, there was a huge drought that went through western South Dakota. And in order for the ranch to survive, Mom and Dad had bought chickens. There were 5,000 of them, and they lived in separate little houses. They were not outside because in South Dakota you can't winter them outside. So Dad, in order for the farm or the ranch, the cows to survive, Dad took my brothers, who were 10 and 12, to eastern South Dakota to farm, to get hay. So they were cutting hay, and Mom and I were left on the place to do the chickens. So we fed the chickens, we gathered the eggs, we did whatever had to be done on the ranch. And that's sort of where I start remembering my caring for animals, that I was doing these different things. You know, if something was orphaned, then I was bottle feeding them, whether it was calves or kittens. The first job I remember as a nurse, if you call it that, our horse had gone through a fence and had cut up her shoulder. And the vet came out and said, well, she'll be fine, but we have to get this wound to heal. And so every day I was out there because I was the right height. I was 5 or 6. And I was the right height to her shoulder, and she would let me clean it up, and then I would put the powder in it, and I would watch that wound. And so it was my first job as a nurse, which was, you know, I didn't think about it. I was just caring for this horse. But her shoulder healed up, and she went on to be an old horse, and we used her as working. My next job I remember as a nurse was my cat Gladys went through the fan into the chicken coop and cut up her belly, and we tried to nurse her back to health, but she didn't make it. But Gladys had Clarence and George, and Clarence and George were kittens that were not big enough to be out on their own. So I said to Dad, I need to bring Clarence and George into the house. And Dad said, cats do not belong in the house. Cats do not belong in the house. So Clarence and George came to live in the basement. That was the compromise. They would be in the basement. And so bottle fed those kittens until I promised when they got to be big enough, they would go back to the barn. George went back to the barn, and Clarence liked living in the house. And Dad learned to tolerate Clarence coming in the evening, and Dad would even sneak him a little bit of food, which none of us acknowledged, right? We didn't see that. But Clarence would come and go, and that was my first successful nursing, that Clarence and George grew up to be tomcats. And they were, there on the ranch until the life of cats happens when you're on a ranch. So I went on my way, and I told my mom when I was, I don't know how old, I said, I want to be a nurse. And her reply to me, which was interesting, oh, every little girl wants to be a nurse. Because in our family there were teachers. And so in the 60s, that really was that were your choices. You could be a secretary, you could be a nurse, or you could be a teacher. And those were the choices. I didn't want to be a teacher. My sister, who was 10 years older, was going on the track to be a professor. She had taught at the University of Wyoming for a number of years until she retired, but that was her track. And my grandmother was a teacher. And I just thought, I don't want to be a teacher. That's not what I want to do. I want to be a nurse. So high school happened, and along in my high school years, I became pregnant and married that gentleman. And for 12 years, that was a tenacious relationship. During that time, I never lost my drive to be a nurse. I wanted to be a nurse. And so I would take night school classes and summer classes, because I knew what I needed to do to be a nurse. I knew what classes I needed to take, and so I would take them wherever. When I talked to the School of Nursing in Rapid City, at first it was run by the nuns. And the nuns told me that I could not be a nurse because I had children. And mothers don't make good nurses. And I thought that was the silliest thing I'd ever heard. And I thought, well, there must be another way to do this, so I'll just keep taking classes. Well, the St. John's School of Nursing sold out to Rapid City Regional. And so when they sold to Rapid City Regional, the nursing program, then I could get in. And so I was taking these classes. I had talked to them a number of times because it was okay to be married and have children and go to school. That was okay. I had worked in the lumber yards, stacking wood, doing things. I had worked as a bartender. That was very interesting. And I realized after I was in nursing school that my work as a bartender was the best psych training I had ever taken in my life. Because you learn to listen, you learn to hear, you learn to ignore, you learn to filter, you learn to know what's real and what's not real. And that was pretty good training. My nursing program, I then got into the VA. There was a VA in Sturgis. It was an 800-bed hospital. The majority of it was a psych hospital, but there was a small ward that was surgical and medical. And so I worked as a nursing assistant on the surgical ward, and that's where I met my first nurse practitioner. Now, in what year would that have been? Toby, 78 is when I met her. And at that time, nurse practitioners were fairly new, and they only were nurse practitioners for pediatrics, is where they started. That was in the 60s where that started. So this fact that this nurse practitioner that had pediatric training was now working in a VA as an adult was kind of intriguing to me. And what did that mean? And so I watched what she did, and I thought, that's where I'm going to go. Someday, that's what I'm going to be. I am going to be a nurse practitioner. Now, some of you that know me know that I'm a little bit tenacious. And welcome. And I just sort of touched that thought in the back of my head. It's like, okay, we'll see how this is going to turn out. Because when I looked at the programs in South Dakota, nursing programs, there were two. There was one East River, where you could get your bachelor's degree, and there was one West River at the hospital where you get your diploma. And a diploma means 3 years. Diploma programs are no longer in existence. They were developed after the program set up by the nuns that you were indentured servants for the hospitals. It is kind of what you were. But Rapid City Regional, the school that I went to, wanted to be a 4-year program. So he wanted to be a 4-year program on West River also. So I took classes from Black Hill State and the School of Mines. My anatomy and physiology was through, my science classes was through the School of Mines. And so I did have these credits that were 4-year degree credits. They counted as real credits. The nursing program still followed Catholic setup. And so you had the crucifix in every room, but nursing is science. And so you did not mix religion and science. Those were separate entities. And so even though you had a crucifix, you were not allowed to talk about things. You could not pray with your patient. That was crossing the line. You could not talk about their faith. That was crossing the line, right? And so there was this push-pull. Now, I grew up as a Lutheran. My last name was Jensen, and we lived in a Danish community, and therefore we were Lutheran. That's how it followed. That was your choice. And I thought this was very odd that I could not say to someone, I'll be praying for you. I thought that was very odd that I couldn't do that. But it's like, oh, okay, you got to follow the rules to some extent. And so it's like, okay, I can do this. Now, during this period of time, this period where I was trying to get my nursing degree, I was still married to my first husband, and it wasn't going very well. And we called it quits because that was that this was not going to work. I was working at the VA. I was making some money. I did not give up my dream of going to being a nurse. I did take night classes. My parents would take care of the kids. And I kept on this dream, on this path. Well, there was this other man who was going through a divorce, and he was divorced, and we were both single for a period of time, and out of the blue, he called me one night. And he was an old friend from high school. We knew each other a long time ago. And he called me this one night. It was one of those nights, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you just have to do something. You have to get out of the house. You can't stand the children. You can't stand the house. You just got to do something. And this kind guy called me that I kind of remember. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. And he said, we talked for a bit, and he said, well, do you want to go out sometime? And I said, yeah, how about tonight? And there was this big pause. And I thought, oh dear. Maybe I was a little forward, and oh well, such as that. And there was a laugh on the other end of the phone and said, you know what? I forgot you were like that. Like what? What am I like? Well, that was David, and we dated for 6 months, and then we were married. Well, during that time, I'm thinking, okay, my upbringing, and the Bible says that if you're divorced, you stay single, right? Because that's the rules. That's what it's supposed to be. And so I was a little bit torn about this fellow that I fell in love head over heels. And so did my mother, and so did my sister-in-laws. my sister stayed reserved for another 10 years. She didn't know whether she liked him or not. But I thought, this is the right thing. And his 3 little boys and my 3 little boys all need to be loved. And if I think about this, children, all they want to do is be loved. They just want to know that they're loved and they're somebody thinks they're important. And so went to our pastor, Pastor Olson, Roger Olson, who talked to us, and he said, you two were meant to be together. He said, I can see it, I can feel it. And our Bible is about grace. Okay, so this is the LCA had it formed at that time. And so we felt like this was okay. This was okay to do. So Dave and I were married, and we put these 6 boys together, and it's like, okay, here we go. Here we go. We are, that year that we were married, we made $20,000. Okay, so we qualified for every government program there was. We had so much free cheese. But it worked. So my grandmother, who was the teacher, called me one day. Dave and I were camping, and because that was cheap. And she called me and said, take me to lunch. Okay, well, my grandmother, if she called, you did. You didn't say why, you didn't question, you just did. And so I took Grandma Ruth to lunch, and we're having lunch, and it's wonderful, and it's great. And she said, what are you going to do about school? I said, well, I'm going to keep going. I'll just keep plugging away at it. This is what I'll do. She said, if I pay your tuition, will you go? This was on Friday. School started on Tuesday. So I went out to where we were camping, and said, Dave, this is what Grandma Ruth proposes. She'll pay the tuition if I'll go full time. And Dave said, go, do it. I said, what about money? How are we going to survive this? He said, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. If you can get in, go. So I called the school on Friday afternoon and said, can I get in full time? Can I enroll? And the person I talked to said, yes, be here on Tuesday. And I said, I don't have any books. It doesn't matter. You be here. You be here and you can get going. So, was that a face of God? I believe so. So the next 2 years I didn't have to go full time because I'd already taken so many classes, the college level. I just needed to do the nursing classes. And there, when I was doing the nursing classes and I was at Rapid City Regional, there was a gentleman, because you understand, I'm in western South Dakota. And western South Dakota was not very populated. And I was in the big regional hospital, and there was a gentleman that I was taking care of, and he was going to go have surgery, and he was terrified. I don't remember what kind of surgery it was, but he was really afraid. And I just said to him, because it seemed the right thing to say, I will be here when you get back. Okay, I'll be here. I'll be here when you get back. It was several months later, my mom told me, this gentleman who was a friend of my parents, he said that was the thing that got me through that surgery. I stopped being afraid because she was going to be here when I came back. It's like, oh, wow, there's power with what you say to people. And I also thought that was probably, I don't know where those words came from, but I thought, somebody fed me that, to know what to say at the right time. And again, that was one of those memories of, was that a God thing? And it probably was. So I finished my nursing school, had met my first nurse practitioner, thought, yep, that's where I'm going to go, but how am I going to do that? Because living in western South Dakota, in order to get your nurse practitioner, you had to go to Iowa, or you had to go to, Iowa, Wyoming were my closest places. And it's like, okay, that's not going to work. I'm not sure how I'm going to make that happen. Well, we were there, and Dave was working in the timber. I was working as a nurse at a Deadwood. I was in Deadwood, South Dakota. If any of you watched that series or heard about it, it's a tiny little town. It was before gambling came in. There was a regional hospital there. You, as the RN, you either were in the emergency room or on the medical surgical floor, or you were delivering babies. So you were the nurse that was in this 20-bed hospital trying to do all these different things. And it was an interesting job. It was interesting, and I learned a lot. And my husband at that time, David, you all know, the timber industry was drying up. And so he went to work in the mine. And he hated it. Hated every moment of it. So we also still had 6 boys that needed somebody there. So we worked opposite shifts. He worked 12-hour days and I worked 12-hour nights. And because he was in the mine, it flip-flopped, and because the hospital understood the mine, we flip-flopped. So for a summer, we didn't see each other. Oh. We were opposite shifts. We would call each other when one of us was near a landline, So we flip-flopped. We didn't see each other, and we didn't sleep, because if you worked nights, then you were home with the boys and you were up, because that's the way it worked. Well, we got to the end of the summer, and Dave's younger brother, Roger, had moved out here to Oregon. They had an uncle here that had a tire place in Kaiser, or Brooks area. They were in Brooks. And so Roger came out and was working for his uncle, and then went to work for Mallory's, and he met Haley, and they were going to get married. So Dave and I decided that we could afford at this point to take a couple of weeks off, bring the camper, bring the boys, and come out to the wedding. Come to Roger and Haley's wedding. Dave's uncle called him and said, if you come work for me, I'll help you move out here. I'll give you a job. I know you're struggling, so I'll give you a job. You come on out. So he came out. We came out and we looked around and we found Silverton, because Haley's from Silverton, and said, well, this looks like where we're from. This looks like the Black Hills, kind of this small little town, and the rolling hills, and this is quite lovely here. So we were here with the boys, and we looked around, and I looked for nursing jobs, and they were all over the place. Here at Silverton Hospital or in Salem, there were nursing jobs. So I thought, well, that's not going to be a problem. But we owned a house, and this was 1988, and housing market was horrible. And, we owned this little house, and what are we going to do? And so on the way, we left our trailer here, because we thought, you know what, we may be back. We'll be back. And so we left our trailer here, and we're on our way home, and Dave, the planner and the warrior, and me, the not so much, said, what are we going to do? I said, well, we own a house, and if the house sells, that's our answer. So we went home, put the house on the market, and it sold in 30 days, which was unheard of. These people came in, wanted that little house, paid us cash. So here we were. Okay. So now here we are. So we packed up this house in this trailer, sold most of what we had, just moved a few things, came out and lived for 3.5 months in a camper with 6 boys and a collie and 2 cats. And it happened to be the rainiest November on record. So we lived up towards Silver Falls. Haley's mom, Jill, let us park our camper there. And in turn, if we parked her camper at her place, she was a traveling salesperson. So we would take care of her 2 teenage daughters and our boys and get them to school and take care of everything. Okay, all right. So I'm hunting for, Dave is going to work. I'm hunting for a place for us to live. Basically, we were homeless. We had a place to live, but we were in this transition, and I finally found this house out on North Abaquah, and in November, and said, okay, we're going to move into that house. And then the people said, yeah, well, we want to spend our last Thanksgiving here. Oh, okay, all right, you can spend your last Thanksgiving there. And then Thanksgiving came, and now 1st of December, we'll move into the house. And they said, oh, we want to spend Christmas here.
Oh, no.
So I went down to the realtor, Terry Castor, who most of you knew, and said, Terry, this is the deal. You either get me in that house, or I'm moving all 6 kids into your office. I'm not, I'm not.
6 boys.
I'm not real aggressive, but sometimes I'm pushed. So that miracle occurred, and we moved into that house the 10th of December. We were in it, and we had the boys, and I'm working now at the hospital. Dave had come home one night from working, and I had long hair. I had shoulder-length hair. And I didn't really like it because it was all over the place, but it was shoulder-length hair, and I didn't have any money to go get it cut. He came home from work just before we moved into the house, and I had cut my hair all off, and I had a new dress, and he said, oh, okay, all right, okay. I said, we're going out to supper. Okay, all right. And so we went out to supper, and we're driving back up to this trailer, and he said, when are you going to go to work? I said, Monday. He said, okay, all right, because I had to start doing something. And so I came to work here at Silverton Hospital. Worked there for 2 years, working on the surgical floor, medical surgical floor, doing some some infectious disease stuff, and it was okay, but we had these 6 boys, and working nursing, traditional nursing, was really tough because I needed to find a way to take care of those boys, to be in and out. So I'm looking in the paper one day, and here's this ad. This ad appears. They needed a DNS in a nursing home at Silver Gardens. And to me, it was sort of this thing of, okay, you need something, here's your opportunity, try it. I knew nothing about doing nursing home. I knew nothing about being a director of nurses, but they hadn't had a director of nurses for months, which I found out later. And so I just bulldozed my way into this job. By this time I'm in my 30s, and so I have some sense. I'm not, a new, unpractical person. So for the next 12 years, I was director of nurses in nursing homes. And that's not an easy job, but it gave me the ability to, if the boys called, I could respond to that. When Jeff, I got a call that your son fell into a garbage can. It's like, what does that mean? What does that mean? I'm not sure what that means. Well, he didn't actually fall into a garbage can. He actually got hit a garbage dumpster and split his head wide open. But it was easier to say he fell into a garbage can. It was less nerve-wracking, right? Okay, all right. So, there was those kinds of incidences, but I could be home. Dave could be in and out, and our life was going along. During this time, I still wanted to be a nurse practitioner. I still wanted to do that. So I talked to OHSU's program, and when I went in, they said, I never got past the secretary. And I said, I want to look at the nurse practitioner position, or the schooling, and they said, oh, you have a diploma, you have to start over the whole nursing program.
Oh.
And I said, no, I have college credits. I have credits from colleges. I don't have to start over. Yes, you do. I went to talk to him twice, and I thought, okay, this is not going to work. So I went to the University of Portland, private school, and I knew it was going to cost me more. But I walked in, and they said, you know, I want to look at your NP program, see what I would have to do, how would I have to do this. Well, do you have transcripts? Yes, these are my transcripts. And I happened to be a 4-point, which was impressive. I never lost that being a 4-point because that was important to me. And the dean of the school looked at those and she said, could you take a little test right now? Sure, sure, I can take a little test, I don't care. So I took this basic nursing test and evidently passed it because she came back out and said, and it was before computers, right? We're still new in this whole computer thing, so it was checking the paper. She came back out and said, we have a program that they are putting together. It was their first year to do it. You went to the college on Friday. You took your classes, 9 classes and different things. And would I like to do this program? And I said, well, when does it start? She said, next week. Okay, all right, okay. And what's the tuition? And she told me, and I said, okay, well, I don't have that kind of money. And she said, we can find it. We can find it. We can find grants. We can find money for you to do this. So I enrolled in this program where there were 15 of us. I went home and asked Dave, said, okay, this is the offer. And he said, what about work? I said, well, I can still work full-time and take these classes, right? So it was an 18-month program, and my response to that is, if I don't die, I can graduate from this program. Because it was tough. It was tough. It was hard. I still came out with a 4-point, but I still think it was a God thing. That I walked into this not knowing anything and get accepted into this program. When I was in the program about 6 months, I realized everybody in the class had been applying to it for years.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, okay, well, I'm not telling them what I did. I am not saying one word about that I just walked in off the street. It was a tough program, but it was well worth it. And got my nurse practitioner at that point, and now what am I going to do with that? I got hired at Willamette View, which is a huge retirement community up in Milwaukee, because they were starting a small clinic that was on their campus that partnered with a doctor's office there. So I was at the clinic full-time, and then their doctors came in and out. And we did this clinic. And I did that for 5-6 years, and then I went to work with Elder Place for about 2 years. And I was working up in Gresham and driving back here. And Dave, at that time, started his construction business, and so he was in and out. The boys are grown up now. They're going their way, you know. And one day I was on 205, stuck in traffic. It was 103 outside. Stuck, I couldn't get off the interstate. I was stuck. And I called Dave. By then we had cell phones, you know, that was a new thing too. Called Dave and said, what are you doing? Because I knew he was supposed to be working construction, but I was hoping he was not working. And there was this pause and this little chuckle, and he said, well, it was too hot to work. So I took the grandkids to the movie, and we've just come out. Well, I didn't sit very well. That I'm stuck on this highway, and he's getting to enjoy our grandchildren. I didn't like that very much. So I came home and started looking through the paper. And I still think it's a God thing. I think God was just present at different times. I open up the paper and I look, and here's an ad in Salem for Willamette View, or Willamette Providers, WVP. Willamette Valley Providers. And they're looking for nurse practitioners to start this program doing nursing home rounds. Well, I knew nursing homes. I knew them inside and out. And I was a nurse practitioner. So I said to Dave, look, I have a job right here. And he said, sure, right. So I applied. And I got the job. And I was with that position for another 10 years. And it was interesting. It was fun. Did a lot of what we did was nursing home visits, trying to keep people in the nursing homes, not in the hospital. I worked with Eliza O as our medical director, and she's delightful. And I still, when she wants to go on vacation, and cover her patients for us, so I still do nursing home stuff. But I'm doing nursing home things, and the program goes away. They decide to dissolve the program because they couldn't prove that we saved money. Because we kept them out of the hospital, so you didn't spend that money, but you couldn't prove that we didn't spend that money, right? So it was they dissolved the program. So I went to work for Physicians Building Group, which was you were your own provider. There were 12 of us providers as a group, but we all earned our own money. We were our own entity. And that was fine. And I kept doing my nursing home stuff. So along came COVID. And I'm doing nursing home visits, and I realize I'm the only outside person they see. I am, those people were in their bed or beside their bed. That's where they got to be, right? They didn't get to come out of their rooms. They didn't get to go to a dining room. There weren't activities for 2.5 years. So I would go in and I would take extra time. I would give myself 4 hours and I would visit every person, whether I was doing a visit or not, whether I was charging for it or not, whether I was billing for it or not. I visited people, and that's what I did. Every week would stop and visit because I was the outside person. And then I began to do the thing that was forbidden. I touched them without gloves on. Because the other thing I realized, they were touched. They were touched with gloves. And so I would wash my hands and I would disinfect them and I would even hug them. So this came from my Stephen ministry work. I learned how to listen more and how to be a little bit kinder and a little bit gentler and a little, I didn't give up my tenacity, nor did I give up my, I'm going to do this anyway, because it was so important during that whole piece of COVID, that person in that little bed maybe is 5 feet long, and they get another 3 feet over here, that's all they get, right? That they have this other person coming that can listen to them, and they can talk to. And that's where COVID did a lot of things. But I think it did a lot of unfairness to our very old, or our very infirmed. It was hard, it was very hard. I now work for a corporation, and that's interesting. And I have decided that I will retire, and I've been thinking about this for 2 or 3 years about retiring. I'm going to retire, no, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to retire, no, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to retire, and then I'm home with Dave 4 or 5 days in a row and go, yeah, I'm not going to retire. I love him, but just not doing something drives me crazy. We went on a month's cruise together, and about 2 weeks into it, he said, yeah, you're not going to retire, because I have to do something. I have been finding things to do, and Stephen Ministry is one of it. Doing more things for the church, being more involved with Growing Hope, doing more things within our community. I was down at high school pharmacy, and the person cutting the fabric was just chatting away, and I thought, okay, maybe that's my next job. To just chat with people, just talk to them. I don't know. I'm going to retire next May. My patients are sad. They have followed me. You know, many of them I've had for 12 years. It'll be okay. There'll be another provider. But that's my story. And all along, God has just been there, been an entity, pushed, opened a door. It might have been a newspaper, but opened doors, you know, and I'm grateful for that. And that's it. Amen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Questions?
What's the difference between a nurse and a nurse practitioner?
The ability to diagnose and write prescriptions. So as a nurse, you often diagnose and you know what's going on because you've seen it before, you've read it, you understand it, and that information goes to the doctor or the nurse practitioner that this is what I'm seeing, this is what this is what's happening. And so then the provider makes the diagnosis, writes the prescriptions. And so that, as a nurse practitioner, that's the other part of it. It's the prescriptions, the diagnosis, the referrals to specialties.
And billing.
And billing. And I can bill insurance. As a nurse, you cannot bill insurance. I think it was that independence that I wanted. People asked me why didn't I go to medical school, and I said because I didn't like the medical philosophy. It's different. Nursing is holistic. They look at the person as part of a community. It's not just natural medicine that the person is part of a greater amount. It's your family, it's your community, it's your dog, right? It's a bigger piece. Medical school looks at it as the diagnosis and the entity. And it's too linear for me.
Have you ever thought about teaching nursing?
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
I did do that for a bit. I worked for OHSU, had a program at Western, and I did do that for a couple of years. My problem was that there was too much politics involved, and so I was okay going in and teaching a class, but I didn't want to be the main teacher and all that political stuff that went with it. Yeah. So do I teach? Yes, I teach every day. Every day I'm teaching because I believe if you're my patient, it's not my disease. It's not my problem. It's your disease and your problem, and I need to give you enough of information that you know how to take care of yourself. And that's teaching. Yeah.
How did you learn to adapt to death of your patients and stuff over time?
You know, I've had that question many, many times because I do internal medicine. I work with old people. I knew my great-grandmother and grandfather and great-aunt, and death was a part of life. Okay? It's just part of life. And I think, again, it's my religious background that you just accept that this is part of the process. You know, growing up on a ranch, there was life and death all the time. And I became quite comfortable with it. Yeah. I have to tell you, the first time I had to call somebody and tell them that their loved one had died, I had to hunt for those words. I didn't know quite how to do that. You know, that's not something you're taught. And so, again, it was going back to your inner self to hunt for the right words. Yeah. Anything else?
How many eggs does 5,000 chickens make?
So each basket would hold 120 eggs.
Yeah.
And every day we would take 3 times a day. You took at least 10 to 15 baskets into the basement to be washed and cleaned and candled into boxes.
That's a full-time job.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned to appreciate music, because we were down in the basement. My brother wired the stereo from upstairs. Mom would load the stereo with records. And there would be 5 records, and so we would do the eggs until the records were all done. So it was everything from rock to Beethoven to big band. And so she taught me about music, candling eggs. Yeah. And that's where I learned to cook too, because I was the last one in the house, and you had to cook for either 3 or 10. You had to be ready. It may be 10 because somebody would stop in, and so then you would feed them. Yeah. So yeah, growing up on a ranch was quite rich, and I loved every moment of it. Yeah. Yeah, and I learned to be very strong, because 120 eggs is heavy. I don't know how much it weighed, but you had to carry 2 baskets. And count. I learned how to count there. Because you had to count all the eggs, because when the chickens started not producing, then they got to be stew hens, right? And you got new chickens. And so you had to count the eggs. So I learned to count by 1s, and then 2s, and then 3s, and then by 3s, because I could hold 3 eggs in each hand. So then I would learn to count by 6s. Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah.
I hope that's a little bit of who I am. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for sharing.